The T-72, one of the most iconic main battle tanks of the Cold War era, found its way into Yugoslavia under unique circumstances. Unlike other nations that simply imported the tank for immediate deployment, the first T-72 tanks delivered to Yugoslavia were handed over not to the troops but to the factories and research facilities. These served as prototypes and reference models for the licensed production of the Yugoslavian T-72M tank, which was slowly getting off the ground. In due time, the T-72M would evolve into the M84, a modernised and domestically produced main battle tank that became the pride of Yugoslavia's military industry. The introduction of the M84 into service overshadowed the relatively small number of Soviet-built T-72s, which saw modest use in training, research, and eventually in combat during the tumultuous years of the Yugoslav wars. Hello, dear viewer. Tanks Encyclopedia is currently closing in on 100,000 subscribers. With this important milestone in sight, we'd like to remind you to subscribe if you enjoy our content and want to see more. Now, back to the video. Despite being a communist country, the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia chose a path of non-alignment during the Cold War, refusing to align with either the East or the West, and instead leveraging its unique position to its advantage. This policy placed the Yugoslav People's Army, JNA, in a precarious situation, as acquiring heavy weaponry, including tanks, often depended on Yugoslavia's ability to deftly navigate its complex geopolitical environment. Far too often throughout its history, the sales of military equipment and spare parts would cease due to political factors. Recognizing this dependency, Yugoslav military leaders concluded that true autonomy could only be achieved through the domestic production of key military assets, such as tanks. Efforts to address this began as early as late 1940s, prompted by the Tito-Stalin split, which disrupted the supply of Soviet military hardware to the newly established JNA. The first domestic tank, the Type A locally produced copy of the T-3485, proved underwhelming and was ultimately rejected. Subsequent attempts at indigenous designs and T-55 copies similarly yielded little to write home about. By the mid-1970s, it became evident to the JNA leadership that external expertise was necessary to create a viable main battle tank. This realization led to the initiation of Project Capella, with the goal of obtaining a license for the production of a modern main battle tank within Yugoslavia. During this period, a Yugoslav delegation visiting the Soviet Union was introduced to the T-72 tank, which immediately impressed JNA armour officers. The T-72 was judged to offer the best combination of hard specifications, such as firepower, armour and mobility, and soft attributes like reliability and ease of production, among all available contemporary tank designs. As a result, the T-72 was deemed a clear upgrade and an obvious replacement for the ageing T-3485s and T-55s in the JNA's inventory. It was quickly chosen as the tank for which a production license would be pursued. Securing this license, however, proved challenging and ultimately required direct negotiations between Yugoslav President Josip Broz Tito and Soviet General Secretary Leonid Brezhnev. Following these high-level discussions, a deal was reached, and Yugoslavia was granted a 10-year license to produce 1,000 T-72M tanks at a cost of $39 million. In accordance with the agreement, the Soviet Union supplied a small number of tanks to Yugoslavia to serve as benchmarks, reference models, and training vehicles, paving the way for domestic production to begin. The model for which Yugoslavia managed to obtain the production license was the T-72M, a downgraded export variant of the T-72A. During the late 1980s, Soviet research and development advancements were being rapidly implemented across the T-72 family, including its export models. This led to multiple iterations of the T-72M being developed. To stay up to date with these changes, Yugoslavia's license for the T-72M was continuously updated, while the country prepared for its production. By 1983, when domestic production of the T-72 in Yugoslavia commenced, the tank had been upgraded to the 172M 1E4 standard, which was considered the most advanced Soviet export model until the introduction of the T72M1. While this tank retained some modern features, it came with an older armour layout similar to the original T72 Ural, lacking the composite materials found in the turret cheeks of the T72A. However, the inclusion of newer components such as the 81mm 902A Tucha smoke grenade launcher and rubber side skirts partially compensated for this deficiency. Whole armour was welded with composite materials added in at the front glacis, which was angled at 68 degrees. The layout of the front plate consisted of an 80mm rolled homogeneous armour plate, followed by a 105mm thick layer of a composite material known as textilite and a second 20mm RHA backing plate. This provided protection equivalent to 305 to 330mm of RHA against armour-piercing, discarding sabot rounds, and up to 450mm of RHA against shape charges. The sides of the tank were flat and measured 80mm thick, while the side armour of the engine compartment was reduced to 70mm. The bottom quarter of the side armour actually belonged to the belly plate, measuring 20mm but sloped at 32 degrees and largely concealed by the bulky road wheels. The rear armour was sloped at 30 degrees and varied in thickness from 45mm to 20mm. The turret was made from cast steel, without composite materials, and due to its complex shape, its armour thickness also varied. According to the official tactical technical characteristics, the turret is considered to have a thickness of 410mm, which was the effective thickness of the turret cheeks from a 30-degree side angle. Area around the mantlet was somewhat weaker, measuring about 350mm. The turret thickness tapered off towards the back, where the sides were 80mm and the rear approximately 65mm thick. The top of the turret had a thickness of approximately 45mm, though the area above the gun mantlet was slightly reinforced, reaching up to 65mm. The T-72M was equipped with a rudimentary fire control system comprising the TPN-149 night sight and the TPD-K1 day sight, the latter featuring a laser rangefinder and an electronic ballistic calculator. Introduced in 1978, the TPD-K1 became standard in post-1978 export models and the T-72A. This sight was an updated version of the TPD-249 day sight used in earlier Ural models, replacing the optical coincidence rangefinder with a laser one. The sight offered a fixed 8x magnification and a 9-degree field of view. The laser was emitted through the sight and could measure distances from 500 meters to 4,000 meters, regardless of whether the tank was stationary or in motion. The TPD-K1's reticule included range ladders for the coaxial machine gun extending to 1,800 meters, and for HE frag rounds extending up to 5,000 meters, which was beyond the rangefinder and ballistic computer's 4,000-meter limit. Other ammunition types, such as high-explosive anti-tank and armour-piercing fin-stabilised discarding sabot rounds, could be effectively used at ranges of up to 4,000 meters. The TPN-149 night sight was mounted in the turret as a separate self-contained unit utilising a Gen 0 image converter that required infrared illumination to function. This illumination was provided by the large L2AG infrared spotlight mounted to the right of the main gun. Another smaller OU3GK infrared spotlight was mounted on the commander's cupola for his own use. The TPN-149 featured a fixed magnification of 5.5 times and a 6-degree field of view. Like the TPD-K1, it employed dependent stabilization, meaning it moved in alignment with the main gun. Targets observed through it required manual range estimation, as the laser rangefinder was only available for day sight. With the assistance of the infrared spotlight, the TPN-149 could detect targets at a distance of 500 meters to 800 meters. In the later T-72A tanks, this sight was intended to be replaced by the more advanced TPN-349. However, this upgrade was not implemented on any of the T-72M. The primary armament of the tank was the 125mm smoothbore 2A46 gun, which was equipped with a thermal sleeve to reduce barrel warping. The gun was fed by an autoloader which utilised a 22-round carousel. Additional ammunition was stored within the turret, allowing the tank to carry a total of 44 rounds. Command tanks equipped with additional radios, generators and other equipment carried less, around 35 rounds. The secondary armament included a coaxial 7.62mm PKT machine gun, mounted alongside the main cannon, and a 12.7mm NSVT heavy machine gun mounted on the commander's cupola for anti-aircraft use. The tank carried up to 2,000 rounds of ammunition for the PKT and 300 rounds for the NSVT. The tank had a crew of 3, driver, gunner and commander. The driver was seated centrally in the hull, while the gunner and commander were positioned on the left and right sides of the turret, respectively. Each crew member had their own escape hatch and a number of periscopes to rely on for situational awareness. Weighing 41 tons, the tank was powered by a V466 780 horsepower diesel engine, enabling a maximum speed of 60 km an hour on paved roads and an average speed of 35 to 40 km an hour on unpaved terrain. The suspension system was identical to that of the T-72 Ural, employing full-length torsion bars with shock absorbers on the first, second and sixth wheels. Solid bump stops were installed on the first, second, fifth and sixth wheels. The tank's running gear featured 6 large road wheels and 3 return rollers per side, with a rear-mounted drive sprocket and a front-mounted idler. Due to its design, the road wheels were not symmetrical, with the left side wheels positioned slightly closer to the idler and the right side wheels closer to the sprocket. The tracks were single-pin and constructed from metal. The tank was equipped with a mechanical transmission system that utilised dual planetary gearboxes, offering 7 forward gears and a single reverse gear. While this design was cost-effective, reliable and compact, the limited reverse speed remained a well-known weakness. Had the tank with the outlined specifications entered production, it would have been designated as the T-72MJ. However, on October 20, 1978, a decision was made to modernise the licensed tank before beginning production. The fire control system, radio equipment and most other electronics were to be replaced by domestic analogues, with the final product becoming distinct enough to merit a new designation, the M84 main battle tank. From this point forward, the development paths of the two tanks would continue to diverge, as Yugoslavia pursued an independent direction for the M84. In the latter half of the 1980s, Yugoslavia acquired the license for the improved T-72M1 armour layout, which was incorporated into the first major variant of the M84, the M84A. This variant, however, introduced numerous additional changes, resulting in a tank reportedly differing more than 60% from the original T-72MJ design, for which the license had been purchased. Despite the cancellation of domestic production of the T-72MJ in favour of the M84, the T-72Ms would still find their way into the inventory of the Yugoslav People's Army. Many details regarding the T-72s in Yugoslavia, including the exact number bought, are unclear, with sources contradicting each other. That is perhaps not surprising, given how the tank was only relevant for a short period of time, after the first purchases, but before the mass production of the M84s commenced, and, for much of this period, the T-72 was jealously guarded as a top state secret. It is, however, generally agreed upon that the tanks arrived in 3 separate shipments. The first shipment, completed before the end of 1979, included 2 tanks labelled OR-1 and OR-2. These tanks were delivered without smoke grenade launchers and featured fish gill armour skirts instead of rubber ones. Additionally, they possibly used the older TPD-249 sight, which lacked a laser rangefinder. These two tanks were extensively tested and measured in order to help prop up the local tank production. In 1990, the OR-2 tank was handed over to the Slovenian company Fotona for testing their fire control system. Details about the system are unknown, but it was likely a precursor to the EFCS-384, which was later used in the M84A4 tanks. After testing, OR-2 was returned back to the T72M standard. The second batch of 10 T72M tanks arrived in 1981, and these would be stationed at the School Centre for Armoured and Mechanized Units in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Reportedly, 5 of these tanks arrived without the smoke grenade launchers, but all had rubber skirts. The OR-2 tank would not be the only T72M modified with a new fire control system, as another tank from this batch was modified in 1988 by the Rudi Chayevets company, the producer of the fire control system for the M84. As with the Fotona's system, the new DNNS2 sight of the SUV M84 fire control system replaced the old TPN 149 night sight, leaving the TPD-K1 day sight in place. As such, both the new and the old sight remained operational, and one could be used in case of a failure of the other, giving the tank a level of redundancy. The tank successfully passed all tests before also being converted back to its base form. The final shipment was the largest one, and consisted of approximately 63 T72M tanks, enough for 3 battalions or a single brigade. Ordered as a stopgap until full-scale M84 production began, they were used to equip the 1st Brigade of the newly mechanized 1st Proletarian Guard Division in Belgrade. In 1991, the JNA had 73 T72 tanks on the books. The OR-1 and OR-2 tanks were never issued to units, and were thus unaccounted for. The first showcase of the obtained T72M tanks was during the Jedinice 83 military exercise carried out by the 1st Proletarian Guard Brigade on the territory of SR Macedonia. This was also the last large-scale exercise organised by the Yugoslav People's Army. The goal of the exercise was to demonstrate synergy and cross-branch cooperation between the tanks, infantry fighting vehicles and aircraft of the Yugoslav Air Force and Air Defence. A lot of emphasis was placed on the cooperation between the new tanks and the M80 infantry fighting vehicles, both of which were just beginning to enter the JNA arsenal in scale. After the conclusion of the exercise, tanks were returned to Belgrade, with some going to the Technical Test Centre, where they were pitted in a series of tests against the first M84s coming off the production lines. The first M84 prototype was ready in 1983, while the rest of the batch of 5 tanks was produced before the end of 1984. At this time, the M84s were still known as the T72MJs, while the Soviet tanks were designated T72MS. During testing, the modified Yugoslav tank acquitted itself well, proving to be superior in nearly every aspect to the foreign counterpart, paving the way for its designation change, production and introduction into the army. While the Jedinice 83 exercise was closed to the public, citizens of Yugoslavia would get their first real chance to see the new tanks during the Victory Day parade on 9th of May 1985. This occasion was used to announce the introduction of multiple new weapon systems into the JNA arsenal, including the M84 main battle tank. Unfortunately, only a few M84s had been produced by that point, and so 15 repainted T-72s were quietly included to boost their number. Not that the average citizen could tell the difference between the two. Behind the scenes and away from the public eye, the T-72 tanks played an integral part in the development of the M84 tank and training of its crews, as well as repair staff and production personnel. Throughout the early 1980s, the tanks were constantly being given to training schools, overhaul facilities, Đuro Đaković factory, Military Technical Institute, and a number of other military organizations and corporations which were somehow involved in tank production, maintenance and employment. Before the sufficient numbers of M84s became available, all new modifications and subsystems for the tank had to be tested on the T-72s. While the M84 was being marketed for sale to Libya, despite the fact that its fire control system was not yet finished at the time, it was a T-72M tank that played the role of an M84 during firing trials. Luckily for the Yugoslavs, the Libyans did not notice the difference. Unfortunately for the Yugoslavs, they did notice a difference in price between the Yugoslav and the Soviet offer, and so the M84 deal fell through. In the later stages, once enough M84s have been acquired, the T-72M tanks were used to test modernization kits, such as the Fotona's and Rudy Chajović's new fire control systems. These were then offered on the world market with some success, as India purchased the systems made by Chajović for its own T-72s, though none would ever be delivered due to the breakup of Yugoslavia. It is not clear what happened to the OR-1 tank, but it likely found itself in Bosnia and Herzegovina during the breakup of the country, where it was scrapped during or after the war. The OR-2, however, survived and is currently on display in Pivka Park of Military History in Slovenia. The fates of the 10 tanks of the second batch are better documented, as most were stationed in the Armoured School at the start of the Civil War. In June 1991, 3 T-72 tanks from the second batch were given to the 9th Corps of the JNA, also known as Knin Corps. As this corps had elements of the territorial defence of the soon-to-be-proclaimed Republic of Serbian Krajina subordinated to them, it is unknown whether the tanks were employed by the corps itself or by these territorial defence units. One T-72M tank appears to have been lost on 30th of December 1991, while another was lost in the early January of the next year before apparently being recovered and sent to Serbia for repairs. The third tank would be returned to the school in March 1992, bringing the total back to 8 tanks. In May 1992, 3 T-72s were in service with the 2nd Armoured Brigade of the Army of Republika Srpska. Of these, one burned up after being hit in combat, while another sustained a hit that deformed its chassis, leading to its scrapping. The final loss of the war was Tank 20646, which got stuck in a ditch in 1995 and was later recovered by Croatian forces. This tank, along with possibly 2 others, was converted to the M84A4 standard in the late 1990s. In 2005, the Croatian Ministry of Defence reported having 72 M84 tanks and 3 T-72s, all upgraded to the M84A4 standard, but the exact origins of those 3 T-72s remain unclear. The 5 remaining tanks from the second batch survived the war in the ranks of the Army of Republika Srpska, but peace proved to be their real undoing. In 1996, following an arms control agreement with SFOR, the Army of Republika Srpska was allowed to keep 137 tanks. To enforce this limit, commanders opted to scrap tanks indiscriminately, including 3 T-72s, despite their good condition. By 2006, the Army of Republika Srpska merged with the Army of the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina to form the Armed Forces of Bosnia and Herzegovina, but no T-72M tanks were inherited by the new force. Of the 2 tanks that escaped the scrapping, one was turned into a museum piece at Kozara Barracks, while the other is currently rotting away at the Manjača training field. The 1st Mechanized Brigade of the Mechanized Proletarian Guard Division from Belgrade saw brief action with the JNA in eastern Croatia. Initially deployed in August 1991 as part of a peacekeeping force, it entered combat on September 29, 1991 as part of the Southern Group, advancing towards Vinkovci. Its performance was on par with other JNA mechanized units, though it suffered fewer casualties than most. By late 1991, the division withdrew from Croatia and was disbanded, with the brigade briefly integrated into the short-lived 1st Mechanized Corps. During the division's time in action, some tanks might have been damaged, but none were irrecoverably lost, as the armed forces of Serbia and Montenegro still listed 65 T-72M tanks in their inventory as of March 2004. The brigade originally had 63 tanks, with one Bosnian T72M recovered from the battlefield, leaving the origin of the 65th tank unclear. Today, at least 61 T72M tanks remain in service with the Serbian Armed Forces. Of these, only a single platoon of 13 tanks is active, serving with the 46th Armoured Battalion of the 4th Brigade, while the rest are in reserve with the Banat Brigade. The T72 in Yugoslavia quickly faded from the limelight, replaced by the domestically produced and more capable M84, which became the backbone of the Yugoslav People's Army. However, the M84 would never have existed without the T72. Its measurements, parts, rigorous testing, and crew training all laid the foundation for the Yugoslav tank industry. In service, the T72 performed on par with its Yugoslav counterparts, and given the nature of the wars that followed Yugoslavia's collapse, the differences between the two tanks in combat became largely irrelevant. Today, while the M84 remains in active use across the region, the T72s that played a crucial role in its development have been largely forgotten, except in Serbia, where they are still fielded in significant numbers, and in the memories of the tank crews who once operated them. Thank you for watching. If you haven't done so already, we invite you to subscribe to stay updated on future content. If you'd like to contribute further, consider supporting us on Patreon or PayPal. We want to especially thank our medium and heavy tank Patreon supporters: Dan Fitzpatrick, Dave Shuford, Leslie Holcower, Michael Herman, Nick H, Owen M, R. Rob, Sopwith21, Wolfund. Your generous contributions help fund our research, illustrations, and video production. Until next time, keep us in your sights.